Hello and welcome to the Outcomes Over Hours show. I'm Tina Patterson and I'm thrilled with the guest that I have here who has so much wisdom and expertise to share with you all. His name is Dr. Sean Gallagher and he's one of Australia's leading experts on the future of work, and he has deep focus areas around technology disruption, hybrid work, as well as generative AI. Sean also is the director of the Centre of the New Workforce at the Swinburne University of Technology. So Sean, welcome to the Outcomes Over Hours show.
Thanks very much, Tina, and looking forward to our chat.
Fantastic. Well, as I just said in your introduction, you spend a lot of time thinking about the future of work. I know you do a lot of consulting also in this space and look at a lot of research and data. So can you share, what are you seeing right now when you're thinking about the future of work that you would want leaders to know about?
That's a very big question. I think that the way that I sort of see things, and let me go back to how you framed the intro for me in terms of starting with tech disruption. To me, the future of work really is around the impact of technology on work. And in particular, how that is changing the structure of how we work. And, that's fundamentally what I've looked at all along. And one of the things that has become apparent to me over the 6 or so years that I've been in this space is that with every tech advance that we've had, and it's sort of, there's been step changes as well as gradual increase in tech sophistication as we've gone along. With every advance in tech, it kind of forces us to become more human. And I sort of part of why I say that for two reasons is that increasingly technology, up until recently, digitalization, it was very good at helping us with processes and data management and making taking a lot of the feedback from the processes and the things that we work on to help inform us to make better decisions in that flow of management and process. But most recently, as I'm sure your readers and viewers and listeners would know, is the impact of generative AI. And this is the first time that we've had a technology that can do cognitive manual labor. So it's very good at doing a lot of cognitive tasks. And if you look at even well before, these sort of technologies have come along, technology has, forced us rather than digging from digging holes to actually thinking about, well, how can I take advantage of the fact that the machine can dig a better hole, and now I can actually focus on building better stuff. And even with generative AI, it's taking over, potentially taking over a lot of the cognitive tasks that we've done. But if you look at each of those sort of conflict or friction points, if you like, between an advance of technology and what people have been doing, the human needs to elevate themselves to a higher level. If not, then the human, the person, the worker in particular, will always be competing with that technology. And so that's what I say in terms of these tech advances. Really, they force us to become more human and actually less worker. I often, it's perhaps a career limiting move to say this coming from a university. I get a little bit disappointed with the hyper focus on skills in the national conversation that we have, in the sense that skills allow us to do particular tasks, and those tasks deliver a certain unit of output, productivity. But by having a hyper focus on skills, we never really lift ourselves above technology, because technology is going to catch up to us at some point. And okay, we need more skills to do a higher level task, etc. That really is, I think, a disservice to the humans in the people that we employ, as opposed to just seeing us as workers. So I'd like to think that, and certainly have seen it, with the advance in technology, that we need to elevate and the more of the human in the people that we employ as as opposed to the worker.
Amazing. And what does that look like to you? I love that. When you think about more human, what comes to mind?
Well, in some ways, when I say more human, it's really fundamentally what makes us human, right? And it's not one of the about 5 or so years ago, well before COVID, I used to drive to work. In the days when did that thing on a regular basis, I used to listen to podcasts, and I can't remember who was talking, but they made this a one-line statement saying, human beings are pattern-seeking, storytelling animals. And it was kind of like a lightning bolt for me. It's like, oh, that in some ways sums up everything that I've been trying to articulate about what I call is our human competitive advantage. It's our ability to, see patterns in unknown environments or in uncertainty, and to tell stories about it. That's fundamentally part of what we are as human, right? It brings into curiosity and imagination and creativity, as well as relating, empathy, being able to tell a story, but also about taking courage and having courage and to take risks in unknown spaces. And I think that, and so in some respects, to becoming more human, we're actually becoming, fundamentally, innately and instinctively who we are in these spaces. And, particularly with generative AI, I think that, one of the things that's is going to really force a focus on is that, I wrote this in a research report we put out, 3 or so years ago, maybe a little bit longer. And I sort of said, productivity is no longer the highest form of value that a human can do in the workplace. It's actually being, creative and, coming up with new concepts. And not that I want to be prescient or to say anything a little bit too grandiose, but in some respects that was, ahead of its time. People say, oh yeah, that's interesting. But with generative AI, it really does force that, a reckoning, because if we just see humans as producers of units of output, the future is not going to look very bright. So we need to bring out the pattern seekers, the storytellers in who we are, because navigating uncertainty, figuring out the future, and doing it in a way that is collaborative, and interacting with fellow humans, and understanding the human condition and the context and the meaning, etc. All of that is innately human, and I think is going to become, even, it's always been important, but I think it's going to be elevated to a new level of, of necessity almost for the future of humans at work.
Oh, that's so insightful. So building on that, what are the 2 to 3 competencies that you think for leaders specifically? So where they're obviously generative AI is going to become just get bigger and bigger in terms of the amount that it takes up from a workplace standpoint, the shift in then what other workers, knowledge workers do. For the leaders themselves, what are the things that they should be thinking about now so that they can be really effective for the years to come?
In some respects, it's it's get out of the way. I don't mean that in a negative sense, but it really is about empowering everyone. And that one of the things, particularly the leadership traits that I think have come to the fore through hybrid working, is because of the dislocation, the separation, because of a remote working, and now in hybrid for millions of workers and thousands of organizations. That to be an effective leader in that space, we need to empower people, and to riff off your the name of your podcast, focusing much more on outcomes, right? But it's more than just outcomes. It's about not only empowering people to focus on outcomes, it's also about making them accountable and setting up the right structures, framework, et cetera, in place so that that workers and that team members feel that they are in a safe space, that they can take risks to actually own the outcomes, but also be very well aware that that this isn't just about the outcome itself. That they themselves, not to be held accountable in a sort of that negative connotation way, but that they own the outcome. And I think that one of the things that leadership traits where they're moving is involving your whole team in problem solving or delegating decision making to the team as much as possible. Traditionally in pre-COVID in the office, a leader might have gone to their 2 or 3 standard go-tos within their team to help them solve a problem. But he or she now needs to, how do we engage everyone? A part of the reason for that is that everyone has a unique vantage point and a perspective on a particular problem. It isn't just whether someone's got the relevant expertise in this space or that space. Of course, that's important, but it's much more holistic than that. And so leaders, I think, need to empower people within their teams to help them achieve those outcomes, but to own them, and that will go. And we'll see that increasingly as generative AI takes on.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And what about your own leadership style, and how would you say that has changed over your career?
Well, in some respects, you should be asking my team as to my leadership style. I think one of the things that for me, I've always, not always, certainly since I started leading larger teams, and when I was at the US Study Center at Sydney University, there were, at one point, I think we had 100 people attached to the center. Then it went all full time, but within my portfolio team, there were about 25 people, and I quickly realized that the way for me to keep work fulfilling, not just for me, but for everyone. So my leadership approach was to constantly do myself out of a job by lifting everyone up to do more of the tasks and take on the responsibilities that I would normally have. And in doing so, allow myself to focus on higher value, more interesting work to grow the organization as well as everyone around me. And I think that is still a philosophy that I take as much as possible, and particularly now with hybrid. Your viewers might not know, my job is in Melbourne, but I live in Sydney, so I have to be, I make a concerted effort to be in Melbourne as much as I can to be with my team. But that means that when I'm there, being intentional, being present, being purposeful in the time that we physically have together in person, I think is super important. But at the same time, getting out of the way, empowering the team as much as possible to pursue their own interests, but also to help them grow with opportunities that that the center might have in front of it.
Yeah, fantastic. And with outcomes over hours in my system, a really big part of it is about working smarter. So what is the best, most practical advice you've ever been given to work smarter?
I don't know that I'm necessarily the right person to be asking that kind of question in terms of working smarter. I suppose to me, it's I'm a very curious person. I'm terrible at saying no. And in some respects, one of the pieces of advice that I either read or someone told me at some point is that you can't create opportunities if you don't create opportunities. And so constantly, exploring, as I said, very rarely say no to stuff. Now, that isn't necessarily smarter in the sense that, being discerning as to discriminating in terms of what you might choose to do or not do. But I feel smarter because I'm much more across and
Yeah.
seeing different perspectives of different views on the same problem. And I think that that's one of the ways that I feel I would define smarter, is that it's not just in terms of the number of hours and being more efficient and effective. It's actually being smarter in terms of having a broader, more broadly informed view on things, and to see the world through other people's eyes.
I love that, actually, because I think there's this tension around saying no. And as you say, a lot of people say, my success is because I say no to 99% of things and I only focus on these things. But to your point, you actually then miss out on how do you dream up and be creative and innovate if it's always on a more narrow area? One that I subscribe to is not necessarily it has to be narrow or saying yes to everything, but if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. So just of the things that are, if I'm going to say yes, it's something that I go, oh, wow, this is exciting, inspiring. We could be dreaming up some amazing new things together. So it's not I say no to everything, but it's also very deliberate. So I think it's really interesting how different people have different levels of tolerance along what they say no to and whether they say yes. But I think that's a really great point, that saying no to everything probably shuts off a lot of other options and exploring things that could make whatever you're working on a lot better.
Yeah, one of the things that the world today is far different to what it was 10 years and certainly 20 years ago. And in some respects, the old view of what a strategic plan was, right? You set your goal, you know where you're going to be in 5 years, you marshal your resources, and you say no, right? You choose of what not to do, and that you focus on the things that what your policy is, and in terms of skilling up your people, making sure you got the resources, you create the opportunities, and you barrel along towards that outcome in 5 years' time. But the world is not like that anymore. And that you might, to me, it's much more important having a North Star and a bit of a vision, but not a destination, because things change very rapidly. And so by saying no and shutting off different perspectives and ideas doesn't allow for agility that might actually be necessary. For example, when sort of towards the end of last year, as you know, generative AI came along, and I'm not an AI expert by any stretch of the imagination. And if I had decided that the center should really only focus on learning and hybrid work and so forth, then I think that it's not only would that have been a missed opportunity to say, well, actually, generative AI is a really interesting new dimension on the impact on work, but in doing so, it actually helps reinforce a lot of the other work that we've been doing. And so it's, had I been, the world's going to be different in 6 months again, right? I have no idea what that's going to be like. So making sure that, ultimately you can't do everything, but that doesn't mean to say that you necessarily cut yourself off to everything.
Yeah, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you for that, Sean. Well, I'd love to finish up our interview here with a couple of rapid fire questions. Are you up for it?
Go for it. I'll see.
Okay. What is the book that you have either gifted or recommended the most to others?
I thought about this long and hard, not because I couldn't think of a book, but because it sort of changed over the years. And I remember probably 25, 30 years ago, the book I was recommending to people was called The Reader by Bernard Schlink, which is the story of a young guy who falls in love with an older woman. And unbeknownst to her, she'd been, a guard in a Nazi prison. And anyway, she ended up getting. I won't give away the story, but I was blown away by, it had such a profound impact on me, the power of shame in that story. Beautiful, I
The Reader.
my eyes out. Another book I'd recommend is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. It's not a happy story by any stretch, but it's probably the most perfectly written book that I've ever come across. Every word is absolutely essential and there's no word out of place. But more recently, I'm very much into dystopian sci-fi in a broader genre kind of narrative. And a book that I'm sort of getting towards the end of is Ministry for the Future, which is what they call a cli-fi, a climate fiction dystopian future. So that's really, I think, my genre. But certainly those two books, The Reader and The Road, highly recommended.
Wonderful. And what's the most fearless thing you've done in recent years?
Yeah, I'd like to say that it was fearless, but in some respects, and I kind of, the biggest impact that I think on me, and I'm assuming on everyone, was in March 2020 when we were all going into lockdown, and there was a heightened sense of unknown, of fear. We didn't know what we were going into. We were living in Victoria at the time, and there was I don't know if it was fearless, but certainly that we had to head into this together as a family and as a society, and without knowing where we were going, and that was it was daunting. There was something, we had to trust authorities. But we also had to challenge everything, in terms of the way that we work, the way that we learn, the way that we connect with people. It was such a fundamental and profound disruption to business as usual in many respects. And so I wouldn't say that I was necessarily fearless. I felt quite anxious through a lot of that. But if I think about anything else, everything else pales by comparison, compared to having gone through a pandemic with you, with all of your viewers, and with everyone else. I think that we can sometimes underestimate that how serious that all was.
Yeah, it's so true. Like reflecting back, or if I think now, I'm jumping on a plane to Sydney later today, and things that were just not allowed and not on the table, and how our world's shrunk so much back then, and now it's being open again. Yeah, it's an interesting one to reflect on. So just quickly, what was your key learning, I'd say, out of that time then for you?
Oh, I think that the biggest learning was that just to change our mindset over what we thought was, this is just how it happens, right? Yeah. And all of a sudden, obviously I focus on work a lot. The concept of the office, right? Before COVID, if you ask people what the purpose of the office was, they'd say, well, that's where you go to do work. And of course, no one would have challenged you on that.
Yeah.
And so there are many other dimensions, but I think the whole pandemic experience really was about changing mindsets around what we thought were universal laws or rules that were immutable, right? And so I think that that's probably the most profound impact on me.
I agree. Amazing. And to finish up, What does outcomes over hours mean to you?
I think the key thing here, and the research that we've done over the last couple of years, it shows that well-being is a critical issue here in Australia, and that many workers are close to burnout, and that we coined the phrase Australia's heading into a well-being recession. And I still think that is very true. The rise of flexible working, the rise in interest in the 4-day work week, for example, and there's a way. How do we minimize the amount of hours that we do, but maximize the output? Earlier in my life, I was a competitive swimmer, and my dad was my swimming coach. And he had a saying that's called "dumb miles," and in the sense that there were a lot of of my competitors and teams, their coaches, they just did miles in the pool, mile after mile after mile, without actually being smart about the training or their swimming. And so in some respects, I kind of see an analogy there that outcomes over hours is just not doing dumb miles in the pool.
I love that. Interesting. So I'm a runner, and so I've run a couple of marathons, and so you get the miles up quite a lot. We talk about junk miles, like don't have the junk miles in there. Is it a long run specifically around this helps you to be on your feet for a few hours, or is this one a hill session, or is this a speed session, etc.? Don't have the junk miles in there. I love that. Dumb miles, junk miles, and that analogy back to work of, don't have the dumb miles there. I love that. Well, on that note, thank you so much, Dr. Sean Gallagher, for being my guest today on the Outcomes Over Hours show.
Thanks very much, Tina, and great to have the chat.